All right. We should be up here in just a second. Always takes a second. All right. I think we are live now. So
Right.
hello and happy Monday. It is January 19th. It's MLK Day. And this is the Solid Ground live stream. I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and I'm speaking with Jennifer Friend, Christine Sefein. And today we are joined by Michael Olen of CTA. So Michael, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel like I'm in every free lunch hour I get on a Monday when I can in and listen. I'm always wishing I could jump in on the conversation. So finally I'm here. I feel like I'm at the cool kids table finally.
Well, consider it an open invitation because we'd love to have you
Thank you.
anytime. It's always great to see you. And I feel like one of the NPR ladies right now. I finally got my mic working again, and so I can kind of hear my voice, and I'm like, hello, this is the delicious dish. I feel like NPR from SNL. But gosh, so much to get into. I'll just introduce
Hmm.
Solid Ground real quick for people who are just checking us out for the first time. Solid Ground is a peer support community that we started about 3 years ago, beginning of January. And we have weekly discussion groups. Right now we have 4 weekly groups, and some weeks we have a 5th. There is a discussion group that follows the live stream immediately. It is a members only group. We don't record it or stream it, and we invite our members in to continue the discussion that we have on these live streams. So if that's something that seems interesting to you, please join. You can find us at Substack, Solid Ground Support at Substack. And I'll put links in the description. Gosh, what else? It is a great group. We started to help people connect through the alienation of a lot of the authoritarian cultural ideologies that we have been living under for a while now, from woke to COVID mandates. It has just been a strange time, political polarization. So we're not a group that really aims to take a particular stance on any of those things. More, we're here to support people in their experience of alienation. And although people have all kinds of different stances, I have my positions, but we're here to support people who want to connect. And we have really, really good conversations in those groups, really intellectual, philosophical, and practical conversations. So you are welcome to join us if you guys would like to. And let's see, Riff Rock says NPR, but without the bias. And Jen is here. Hi, Jen. Nice to see you. A Male Space, hello. And Morning Cigar, hi. Good to see you guys. Ray, hello. Glad we have our friends in the chat. So gosh, so much to talk about. And Michael, maybe for people who don't know you, do you want to just briefly introduce what you do and your work?
Yeah, every time I'm asked a question like that, I think, what's my log cabin story gonna be today? But I'm Dr. Michael Olen. I am a CTA co-director over at Critical Therapy Antidote with Christine Sefein here. I'm also a doctor of psychology and clinical psychology. Don't say clinical psychologist just yet, or you set some state bureaucrat somewhere. So I want to be very clear on the record with that. Um, I'm a therapist. I work in private practice, a private group practice in the Chicago area. And I've been in the field largely since about you could say 2016, 2017, working in various roles, even before coming back from my doctorate, and now working in just kind of a generalist format in an outpatient setting. I co-host the CTA podcast with Christine and Jaco, also one of our co-directors. And as part of my doctorate, I kind of got thrown into what a lot of people got thrown into, which was a completely terraformed and changed psychology field. I had had a kind of a gap between my undergraduate at the University of Texas at Austin in 2015 and then returning for my doctorate in about 2019. Came back to a whole different world. Had a little bit of preemptive warning just from like kind of cultural conversations online that something had shifted or changed, but really saw the temperature change when I got back in the classroom. And I could say pretty much from the first Monday, 9 a.m., first class I remember being a diversity class, I was like, oh no, something has gone terribly wrong here. Just the way people were discussing, the way that dialogue had just shifted towards conformity as opposed to authentic self-expression. something felt off right away. And I couldn't tell initially that was just kind of the bias of prior knowledge, or if I really was seeing what I was seeing. Over 5 years, I think I pretty much got that confirmed over and over again, um, too many times to count. Even starting with my doctoral interview, where I was asked to name my privilege in my interview in my one-on-one and try and describe a way I've been privileged or benefited in a way that maybe a peer, hypothetical peer, whatever peer I could make up in the meeting, in the interview, didn't get to have. And at that time, there had been a shift from what I thought of as socioeconomic privilege, as we've traditionally kind of discussed it in the field, to this multifaceted intersectional privilege, which had its own rules and its own dynamics. That led to me kind of working on it as a specialty interest with my dissertation, looking into it. At the time, I was looking at things from kind of a political lens. I didn't really know what that meant exactly. I just knew there was a real emphasis on left and right. As I started to explore things, I realized there was more a moral dimension, a value-based dimension. And for context, I started really in the field working in residential OCD, on the ground as what was called a resident counselor, day in, day out with people who were suffering from mental illness, really thrown into, if you learn a language best just by thrown into it all the time. I learned OCD by being with people all the time. And the one thing that became clear over the work was, and it was about 2 years in total, that OCD was very morally laden. I don't think that was news to anyone who really understood the disorder. But for me, as an early career clinician, I was like, all of my clients have some sort of moral imposition that their mind is hoisting onto them. And it's making their life extremely dysfunctional and very painful. And that kind of informed some of the concerns I had when I came back to school, which was there were all these moral rules, all these moral prescriptions that people had to take in and profess as true. And through a number of experiences, including working with a client who, although I didn't recognize it at the time, was expressing things that I learned later more consistent with critical race theory, for instance, the popularized version of critical race theory. I was concerned that clients like that were going to experience extreme distress and extreme pain from these ideas. And so off I went to study it through a moral and political lens. And it was crazy making at times. It's also changed my career in a direction I never thought it would go. I never thought I'd be public facing, for one thing.
Mhm,
Um, I was aiming to be a
mm,
therapist, one on one,
mm,
working with my
mhm,
clients.
mm.
Mm. Wow, that's a really, really great description of what you experienced. I remember that so well, that kind of I had that same gap between undergrad and
Mm,
going back to graduate school, and the feeling that something was really off. And I think it took me a while to really identify, and I'm still puzzling through what has
mhm.
happened. How did this happen? And we've seen it just really captured the psychology and applied psychology fields
Mm.
in a way that's extremely concerning. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so
Yeah.
you've been thinking a lot about what this next chapter might look like as more people have come to some of the realizations that you and I have shared, that Jennifer and
Hmm.
Christine have experienced, that we've been talking about on this channel for over 3 years now. What does is woke peaked? Has woke peaked? And are we looking at moving into something post woke, or are we still deep in it? First, before we get into what post woke looks like, do you think we've peaked?
I hear people ask this question a lot. Have we hit peak woke?
Mhm.
Yes and no. I think in the cultural milieu, it's lost a lot of social currency. I think it shamed itself nearly out of existence in some ways, but perpetuates itself because shame still exists. And what I mean by that is I fundamentally conceptualize woke as a a psychological profile that you could probably pick up and re-put down with different beliefs, ideologically speaking, regardless of what the beliefs are. So kind of an authoritarian profile that gets activated when certain things happen either culturally or in the media, or maybe they get augmented or exacerbated by the media, and that leads to these kind of confirmation biases in the mass formation, people
Mm-hmm.
responding to it. I consider them activated events. And so you see that kind of pattern with any ideological group, any authoritarian group or fringe group, extremist group, however we want to conceptualize it, that every so often regalvanizes it. Now, woke is very interesting in that it's formalized in our education. It was formalized in our ethics codes, or at least our expectations of how we would conduct ourselves, assuming that we were in line with that, ideology. So yes and no, and the no is that it can always be reactivated. It can always come back up. And I think part of that is because we haven't really come up with a way to strategically inoculate ourselves, not just from wokeness, but from the pattern of psychological dispositions that kind of come with wokeness. So I wish the answer was yes from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint. Professional standpoint, because over the last couple of years, and I don't know what you guys have seen, just even in conversation, but with clients, I often see them coming in repeating cultural rhetoric as though it were personal story,
Mhm.
right? So as part of my job, it's to dive into someone's story and not alter it, not change it, but explore it and understand how they're making sense out of it, to see if we can derive a certain philosophical sensibility that might lead them towards something that looks like healing. That's what I kind of roughly conceptualize my work as. But if something happens in Minnesota, if the Supreme Court is trying to make a determination, if we have an event going on overseas, wokeness and other extremist ideologies respond. They respond and they're loud. So it's still here and it still has the chance to pop up. The question is, are we going to change our attitude and our way of dealing with it? Are we going to actually manage it a little bit differently? Which kind of bleeds into what I wanted to talk with you guys about, the idea of a post-woke vision. I don't consider it a vision of, okay, let's just forget all that. Forget that time period happened. Let's just move on. I consider it okay, what can we learn from that?
Mm-hmm.
Reincorporate and reestablish something like a psychological immune system, both in mental health but in the greater culture, that is more resilient to kind of tendency, pattern of behavior that keeps us flexible. I often make a distinction between flexible and fluid. Fluid got so popular. Flexible, that allows us to be available to the moment, that we can respond to the culture. We didn't used to, I don't think, and I wonder what you guys about this. We didn't used to teach clinicians, we didn't used to teach people generally to be subsumed by the cultural activities of them, in particular
Yeah.
clinicians. You might often hear, somebody talk about objectivity. For folks who are in the field, they'll know they've heard, find your objectivity, and that it, kind of can be like beating a horse. But then this whole other thing came in, which was like, well, what about subjective experience? It's like, okay, where's the intersection of the objective and the subjective? In that, it got me thinking about a different way of framing. And so for the last year or so, I found myself very unable to write about these ideas. In part, burnout from my dissertation, no doubt. In part, burnout from the experience in grad school, but also in part because I felt like I was stuck in this trench warfare in my mind,
Mhm.
where the culture wars is happening and we're just not gaining ground. Nobody's gaining ground. We're all just upset all the time. An algorithm can just piss you off that day, and you'll get pulled into some other state that you don't need to be in. A state that if you take it for a ride, can fragment your thinking, fragment your relationships. So some of the things I've been thinking about in line with that are things like, how about the idea of cultural distance? I'm just throwing out ideas today. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want anyone to take these and say these are to be, nailed to the side of a church or something like that. These are just things to think about. And I had a colleague put it perfectly a few months ago, knowing how to put up a firewall on your identities, knowing how to put up a firewall on what's happening outside of the therapy room, a private
Yeah.
conversation, a relationship. without letting it bleed in and take you over. Our culture's dynamic. It's not static. So to get activated by it in a very rigid way doesn't seem like it's particularly productive for moving into the space that you want to be in, which is probably something that's more adaptive long term. I know I'm speaking in vagaries a little bit here, but it's really I've been trying to get at this philosophical disposition that I don't think we lost, but I think it went underground. I think it went into hiding a little bit.
Mm.
And we need to find a way to get back to it. So I've been kind of writing about that recently. You know, when you teach somebody, like you say, you do values clarification work, you are teaching somebody to organize themselves with an intention, right? Their mind's eye is focused on where they want to be. And then a collection of beliefs kind of flow underneath that either get in the way of a productive way of getting to what they value and kind of unproductive ways. And you can kind of sift through what those are depending on outcome. But what I've not heard anyone really put forth is, where do we want to go after all of this? And what do we want to reincorporate? At least personally, I haven't heard very much of it. So I feel like I'm going on a little bit of a diatribe here of saying we need to have a better vision here of what things will look like and what we'll protect.
And when you say we, do you mean specifically the counseling field? Who's the we when you're speaking?
I mean the counseling field. I mean greater culture as well. There is a dynamic relationship between the counseling field, let's just say mental health, and the greater culture. The difference, though, I think that I've seen over the last couple of years is fields like counseling, let's just say as an example, were absorbing the cultural conversation through a lens they were taught to see it through, and then responding to it as either therapists or just as people that was giving rise to either cultural norms within the field. And I see this across fields. So I'm just using counseling as an example right now. But there were certain sensibilities, I think, that were maintained and held on to. And group, I don't think was one of them.
That's right.
In fact, quite the opposite. I was always taught to question
Mhm.
the authority of the person in front of me. And not only question it, it was welcomed for much of my education up until I would say a certain point. This was something that was encouraged. So it is kind of it's a broad we.
Well, there seems to be an emergent quality to some of this and an engineered quality to some of this. Like we are the current generation of people being trained into and just using the counseling field as the example,
Sure.
are products of their own environment, learning, their own the broader cultural trends that have influenced everybody. So they're a product of that. So there's this part of this that's emergent, but there's also an engineered quality where you see the associations and the licensing bodies and the educational institutions choosing to inject a heavy dose of this kind of conformist groupthink into the requirements for what it takes to become a counselor, what it takes to be educated in applied psychology. So there's those two things. And I wonder, I have so many questions for you because in thinking about political polarization, for instance, and just the groupthink around CRT or one of these things, it's reductive in nature. And I have wondered, to what extent is that just a reaction to having a broader sense of the world at large? We do now have so much more access to more people, more culture, more trends through our daily life. And, it used to be you had to turn on the news or watch some show from somewhere else to have a sense of what life was like somewhere else. But now, like we're talking, we're all across the US right now, the four of us, all across. And this is just a normal thing for a lot of people to get on social media and be reading about what people think in Ireland or in New York or in Nova Scotia or whatever. It's just
Right.
we have such a broad sense of the culture. And I think that reductive thinking might be an adaptation in some ways to trying to hold more in our minds. And I also think I might be articulating this poorly, but wokeness can be seen as a process and content sort of situation. So like the process is the authoritarian groupthink and that we all must do this thing. And the content is what leftist ideology, you know, perspectives and viewpoints on privilege, marginalization, race, sex, this kind of stuff. But you can see this sort of narrative counter narrative thing where people reacting to it take on the same process, but utilizing different content. So they object to those things and they develop their own, but there are bubbles that are created. And I wonder, does post woke look to break the process or just to expand the content? I think you're getting at process when you're talking about flexibility. But how do we do that with all the cultural knowledge that we hold and all the exposure we have? How do we do that?
I think that was beautifully stated. And yeah, we're on like portals talking to each other around the world with some level of access to one another to some degree, but not with the total subjective experience. For instance, where I am is very cold right now, and where you are also cold, but not quite as cold. We won't get into that. One of the things that came to mind was, for me, and I'll stick to my closer to my wheelhouse in mental health, is we were always pitched this idea of cultural humility as like an ethical value or some sort of sensibility. But when was the last time you heard someone say we need to work on the sensibility of comfort with not knowing, comfort with the ambiguity? Now, as a counselor or a therapist, that is a great clinical skill, but it's also a great adaptive life skill because there are just circumstances that are so complex. You don't know how to respond to everything. And so I think even if the content changes, perhaps maybe the avenues to explore is teaching people again to be comfortable with that not knowing. And that might sound a little wishy-washy to somebody sitting at home that goes, how do I be comfortable with not knowing? Practice. You can practice saying things like, I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm uncertain, I'd like to explore that more. You can practice those things. Early therapists, in my experience, and I think I experienced this as an early therapist, often experience the desire to want to know the answer to everything their client is bringing to them, which is so multifaceted, rich, and complex. Good luck. It's not like that. That's not what you're up to. I see it more as, and I don't know what you guys think about it, I see it as an ironing out process. By the end of this hour, spread across time, multiple hours, we still may not know. But maybe together we can come up with a philosophical disposition as to how you might want to organize yourself or traverse the not knowing. So I don't know if that fundamentally answers the question of what do we do with content, but I do think there are certain, and this is how I usually refer to them, core sensibilities that we can start to water and till that will make us more flexible, more adaptive. I come back to those all the time because there's so much variability in the world. But teaching somebody to be certain about a war or some atrocity or some occurrence halfway around the world that's so complex, clearly, that it's giving rise to conflict, and the people there don't even know how to deal with the complexity. Teaching people to take a stance on that
Yeah. Oh, Michael froze up a bit.
that's
There he goes.
apologies. Train.
No, that's okay.
Actual train this time. That to me is not a productive skill set. I think we started to reward moral certainty under the guise of something ethical or morally desirable. In this case, let's say wokeness. But I think that we could have easily rewarded something like not knowing, being okay with not knowing.
I love
Mhm.
that so much. I'm so glad you're articulating it that way. I love this point. I wish you could just shout it and put it on billboards. It's okay not to know. I've made this point a couple of times, but for me, I guess it would have been maybe 2017, 18 when I first found Joe Rogan's podcast. I was kind of new to podcasts. And I was listening to a lot of stuff. And one of the things that I really respected about him was his willingness to not know. He didn't have to be an expert. He didn't have to say, he could be curious. He could be like, well, I don't know, tell me more, And I don't know. I think Michael, you're a little bit younger than me, but maybe the other ladies will remember or have this same memory, but I can remember when I was a kid, maybe it's a Gen X thing, but it was so uncool not to know. Like when somebody was like, oh, you know this song, you felt like this pressure to know the song. You had to know.
Right.
And you were a fool if you were
Yes.
clueless about something. And so that's a lot of pride. There's a lot of pride in that. And we also have this over reliance on experts where the expert is the
Yes.
highest priest, and so we all need to know all the time. And I really love reclaiming the space of of curiosity instead of certainty.
I think that's really important because this came up in the classes that I taught all the time. I mean, I was teaching, students that were just getting into psychology for master's degrees. Most of them were older. It was usually career change type of situation, at least back then. It's a little different now. But the comfort or the contentment, comfortability with the not knowing is a way that we always kind of talked about training therapists to be able to do with their clients. That was one of the key core skill sets that we were trying to help infuse into the whole education process so that when you're with clients and there is all of this ambiguity and all of this uncertainty, and the feeling of being overwhelmed by that, or having to come up with an answer for that client, or the client needing to come up with their own answer, that doesn't always happen, right? And so this whole idea of working with that, I almost feel like I'm sitting here in one of my classes or with a group of supervisees talking about what therapy used to be and what it was supposed to be about and what we were supposed to be working on and learning and doing and helping our clients do that for themselves. So this massive shift, in how classes are taught now and what therapists now that are just coming out of the field are doing, they don't have that skill set. They just don't. I mean, we did a survey at CTA after training we did, and the response that we got from that about what people wanted to learn more about or be trained on was skill sets, basic skill sets. And these are from therapists that have been out for a few years, all the way to therapists who were just stepping out, all the way to the students, and maybe even some people that have been out for a while. But these basic skills of just navigating life in that way and finding a level of comfort within yourself, comfort in the ambiguity, in the gray, which is kind of what I used to call it a lot of the time, not the black and white, but living kind of in that space, is what they're not getting. And that's what to me is probably one of the worst skills that are not being trained on, with these students that are coming out nowadays. And that is something that is crucial to the process. So this conversation is sort of right top of mind for me all the time is where did that go? Where did curiosity and wondering go? Where did we have to come up with an answer rather than explore? And now exploratory therapy, as you all know, is not necessarily the direction that is our associations want us to take. They want, more affirmative types of therapies, which have a place, but they're not to be used everywhere at every time. That's not the goal. So those are just my 2 cents based on what you're talking about, Michael, because that's really something that's missing. And I don't know how to get not just the therapy field, but in general, humans to a place where we are comfortable to some extent with being able to move through the uncertainty and know that we might have the skill set as thinking and functioning adults to deal with whatever comes at us, because we, don't know what that will be, but we have the skill set, we have the the inner self-esteem or the inner, ego strength to be able to manage approaching conflict. And that's just been lost.
And think about the anxiety that comes with that. I mean, really, as a in some ways an early career clinician, if I am having to think through, and this is kind of one of the third points I've been thinking about, which is making it okay to make mistakes again, where we think a little bit about motivation or intent versus impact, which I think things got flipped, where emotional harm became synonymous with actual harm, just harm proper as an umbrella concept, and it got conflated. People were no longer given the room or the space, let's just say clinicians in this case, to fumble on the words, and of course, part of being in school or education, if we're talking about practicum training, part of that is to try and master a general set of techniques, maybe open-ended questions, but not to the detriment of how you show up authentically. That was never an impression I got. It was sometimes the best moment with the client is when you stumble on your words, when you spill your coffee, when you trip over yourself. These are not moments that you have a simulated recording of online where somebody can show you how to recover from a mistake, or saying the wrong thing, or assuming something by accident, or misunderstanding and misinterpreting a session from 3 weeks ago, or a month ago, or 6 months ago, and having to know how to navigate and readdress that. If we have all these anxious clinicians going out there, they will likely make mistakes, but then it won't be okay to make mistakes. And the way that they repair those mistakes may not be masterful, because it's okay to say something wrong in a session and go, you know what, actually, this is where I was coming from. This is my frame of reference, and be human. I think what we're talking about here, and what's often difficult about what core therapeutic sensibilities is, they're not tincturizable. You can't put it in a bottle and have someone drink it and then they go out and they do that. This takes practice. This takes time with yourself and with other people. It takes a certain comfort and familiarity.
And art. It's an art. There's an artist, kind of artistic, flow that evolves through the time that you're doing. And that's why there are no definites. And that's, therapy wasn't meant to provide definites, I don't think.
We often say it depends for a reason.
It depends. That's right.
When I was in graduate school studying counseling, I found this to be one of the areas of major contradiction in the program, because on the one hand, you would have that kind of message. And I had a very, very good counseling skills course. The teacher was excellent. And one of the first things he did with us was make us sit in session without asking any questions or giving any advice.
Yes.
And I loved that. That was really, you find other ways to communicate empathy or understanding, or to get deeper into what somebody is saying when those tools are taken away from you. But then we also had this, I think, the medicalization of the field, and I really recoiled from the use of the word clinician, which people use a lot. I don't like it for counseling. I just don't like it. And I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but it is a signifier of authority. And with that diagnostic and clinical angle, it's a very data-based and medical and authoritarian stance and role that the counselor ends up taking. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about departing from that paradigm in my own work, as and I call my work coaching or consulting. It's not counseling, because counseling is a term that is used by this in our neck of the woods right now in a very specific way. But I like that I can show up as just a person with another person. I'm not presenting myself as an authority or some kind of advice giver for somebody else. I'm presenting myself as someone who's there to listen and work alongside someone. And And I got a lot of that from my counseling education, but I also got really mixed messages about authority and expertise that I felt were, quite frankly, dangerous, considering the quality of the education overall and the quality of the graduates. That these people are out there presenting themselves as authorities over other people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's different, I think, views on this, even within the field proper,
Mhm.
on who's more on the science side versus on the art side. And I tend to oscillate between the two.
Mhm.
Um, I would never want my knowledge to confront my art in some way of how I approach somebody. And I think the
Mhm.
greats, regardless of clinician or therapist or whatever we want to regard them as, counselor,
Mhm.
I think they all learn this lesson at some point in their career. They write a book about it, we learn about them, but we're not heeding their message, we're not taking it to
Mhm.
heart. I mean, I think Jung described it that way. I know Rogers described it that way. He tends to be kind
Mhm.
of at the heart of most approaches to psychotherapy, at least on the relational side of things. And I shared with you a while back an excerpt I really liked from Rogers, which was um, what on being a person.
Hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's on being a
Page
person.
8, I think it was. And he described walked into psychology from his theoretical background, where he said, I thought it would be a shame to have to profess a certain set of beliefs in order to remain in one's group. So I moved to psychology. I'm paraphrasing, of course. The irony is that I think if Carl Rogers were alive now, he might move over to theology or something else,
Mhm.
because that same pressure to conform and be dogmatic has taken over our field in a way that does not help clients, and it doesn't make for, there's a certain element of our work that also is the therapist is evolving as a person as well, as a byproduct of the exchange between themselves and other. You end up becoming such a storage house for so many other people's stories. You're running so many simulations every week. If you're not learning from that experience, both about yourself and the client, then I would encourage you to take a real hard look at what your process is. Is it just some rote engineering, redesigning, restructuring thing you're going into? Which you can do. It tends to be the caricature of things like CBT, for instance, that somebody goes in, they give you a thought
Hmm.
record, and they give you a bunch of cognitive distortions, and here are the 12 distortions. Here's how they're related. You're doing all of these. Let's stop doing that. That is a caricature. The
Hmm.
best cognitive behavioral therapists I've ever worked with are not that way at
Hmm.
all. They use those skills, but only as a reference point to
Right.
help enhance the life of their client. The heart, the bread and butter of it is still relational, is
Hmm.
still something that otherwise it's not, I don't think it's particularly effective. Because it's that engineering I think you were describing, Leslie, where they go into engineering mode of their clients.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think when you have that authenticity as a therapist, this parallel process that you're talking about, Michael, where the client
Mm,
is part of the process of the therapist is also part of a parallel process that's going on. That's when that can actually happen and become very can evolve and become very meaningful for the therapist and the client. But the canned therapy is kind of my term for
mm,
that. It's the therapy you get in a can, doesn't allow for that space. And medicalization of therapy has made it even more so that way. And I'll say that because through the medicalization of therapy and insurance paying for it, insurance companies want to see certain kinds of therapies used and other kinds of therapies not used in order to pay.
mm,
So you either get really creative with what you say when you turn in, the utilization reviews and things you need to do, or you risk, if your client is there with insurance, not being able to do that. So I think that's a whole different topic, but I think that that does bring a piece into the room as well, is
mm-hmm.
that the medicalization component with the insurance being involved can create something that's more rote and more cliched and more canned, not nuanced, not art, not no sense of art, an art
Right.
factor coming in, no sense of a flow. Um, so I think that's a very complicated component also.
I think that's a wonderful point. And that's one of the, I think it's very important not to overlook or understate the influence that that particular third party payment exchange is impacting the practice of this field. I really felt like the way that we were taught to write smart treatment plans and do these other elements of our work and diagnose, and there was a lot of construction that's around insurance. And even
totally.
this is something I don't hear people talk about very much, but I found it really jarring that we were actually being taught kind of low-level insurance fraud all the time. Like
Yes.
we're being taught, okay, so you think this about your client, and this is what you would use this diagnosis if it's appropriate, but because of how insurance works, we want you to use this diagnosis over here. And that's a part of the training, is how to manipulate the insurance in order to serve your client. So at this point, you've distorted something about your work, because that diagnosis isn't there to serve your client and help them and to serve your knowledge of your client. It is like a little signifier for the other guy, so that they'll pay for you to keep seeing your client. So I felt like that was very ethically disturbing to me in my training. And Jennifer, I know you wanted to say something.
Oh yeah, my brain started to split off into thoughts about insurance, but before
It'll do
I'm a
that.
therapist. I'm a therapist who takes insurance. But before that, I was thinking about what you guys were talking about with the sort of the getting comfortable with not knowing and sitting with that, but also the creative process of therapy. And I think therapy is ultimately a creative process, because as you start to just really sit with what the client's saying, you realize there's so many different ways of understanding it, so many different ways of coming at it, and so many different directions that the client could go with whatever they're experiencing, And to me, it seems like the schools being infected with wokeness, that's ultimately an authoritarian thought system, because it doesn't allow questioning, and it positions itself as knowing all the answers. We know, and we can clearly define all the societal problems. We also know the cause, and we know who's causing them, and we know exactly what should be done. And because we know this, and we know it certainly, any questioning of it or any exploration of it is this enormous offense, and means you need to do better and do the work. And we know exactly what conclusions you should arrive at as you do this work, as you consider these social problems. And so it really cuts down, I think, on the creative aspect of therapy, and just being able to sit with something and not know, and support your clients in that uncertainty, and not knowing exactly how to understand something or what to do. It really sort of eats at the roots of therapy itself, and good good therapeutic work. I see it as, just completely corrosive to our field.
Absolutely. And, with all of that, thinking about that cultural distance, having that authenticity, being able to make mistakes, for instance. And yes, I have a list next to me. I'm not being inauthentic in this moment. I'll be honest about that. But the last one I've been thinking about, and this actually came from an experience in a psychiatric hospital, which was, I think this is correct. I think I was once told, and I haven't looked at this in a while, that Freud's second book was on humor in the analytic process. I have to double check that. Somebody can fact check me on that. But humor is such a defense to so much of what we've seen over the last couple of years. The ability to speak irony, to inflate and deflate, to diffuse tension. I mean, one of my earliest clinical experiences I remember is working with a client who, through her tears and just speaking things out, started laughing when she recognized how ridiculous her mind was being to her. It was one of the most beautiful moments I ever had in my career, and it's one of those formative moments. On the flip side of that, I remember being in the psychiatric hospital, and the staff there, who were just among the just really great people. I'll just put it like that. Just really great people doing what they did because they loved what they did in a very intensive setting that is not forgiving of any mistake in a sense. You slip up with somebody who's in high states of aggression or agitation, that's not a good moment sometimes.
Yeah.
But they had this little board that they kept And the board was they would write down quotes that they would hear, maybe on unit, nothing that gave up anybody's identity or anything like that, that kind of uplifted them, that kind of made them chuckle a little bit throughout the day. Really tough work, mind you. And it was kind of like their way of keeping their morale up. And I remember that year being told that they had to get rid of that board. There was nothing. I remember reading it thinking, this is just kind of funny. It's just something to chuckle at, something you heard during the day. And a little, I'll try and put this politely. Somebody came in with an activistic bend. One of the students threw a big fit about it. And everybody at the hospital, I guess, must have gotten upset about it or concerned about it. They weren't actually upset about it. They're concerned probably about liability in terms of what was written and how the training site might be viewed. That was at least my impression. And they took the board away from these people. And I watched as this staff, and having worked as a residential counselor, I knew what it was like to be day in and day out with people. You need something to boost your mood during the day. And these are sensibilities, whether it's something funny, whether it's dark humor, whether it's joking with your colleagues.
Yeah.
It's not to make fun of the client. It's to diffuse the tension in you so you can actually continue to do your job.
100%.
I watched the staff, guys. I watched them turn into gray blobs after that. Like bit by bit, doing some of the toughest work you could possibly consider in a high acuity setting. And this person came in with this person, presumably, I would assume, with not a lot of experience, no real reverence for what that was actually facilitating for them and how it was actually allowing them to facilitate quality care consistently. They had no reverence for humor because their social activist teachings told them that humor was harmful. And we really need that in our field to survive. And not only that, our clients need it. It is a good thing for them to develop in our work together. It bodes well for treatment. Sometimes you got to say something a little pithy, something with a little bit of a smirk to see how your client responds. And sometimes they need to do it too. It's human, it's relational. I don't know that anything I'm saying today is reinventing the wheel. I doubt it is. It's saying what I want to say today is, can we reincorporate the things that made us hum at our best frequency, if and when that was occurring, versus this extremely dogmatic era that we've been in, which we've been in before. If you look into the history of psychology, not all hands are clean. That's not the point. The point is that, can we oscillate or swing back to something that is functional?
My gosh, I really hope so. I worked in I know the kind of environment you're talking about because I worked in the state psychiatric hospital on the acute unit for 7.5 years. And some of my best moments there were moments that were really funny. And sometimes it was when I was saying something that was very off the cuff that might not have been considered, therapeutic. Like I had a very agitated patient who came in involuntarily say to me one day, very angry, "I've been here 5 days." And I turned around and I said, "Oh yeah, I've been here 5 years." And he burst out laughing. And, there's just these, and then it's like this moment of connection, and then you can talk a little bit more. And there's just these things that happen when you're able to be more real and you're able to make mistakes and you're able to not know and to not be viewing all your clients through this restricted lens of, well, this person's here on the hierarchy of oppression and privilege, and this person is here and I'm here in relation to them, so now that's going to guide how I relate to them. That just removes the personhood, and from the equation.
Yeah,
Dr. Humanity.
I feel sad about the things that have happened in our field. I want to get back to a better, more human space.
We had a OTI had a workshop with Dr. Christine Anarella, and she talked about the therapeutic value of humor. And it was such a good workshop. I really enjoyed some of the points that she made. I wonder if maybe I can reach out to her and see if she would want to talk with us about that. But that's one of the things that, Jen, I really appreciate about you. Just an anecdote, when I was trying to figure out how to grapple with what I was dealing with in graduate school, like, can I continue this? How do I approach this? And I met Jennifer through CTA. We both joined Critical Therapy Antidote early on. And so we were in these member groups together. And Jen helped me with a couple of one-on-one just discussions when I was trying to put it all together. And it, like, one of the most helpful things I experienced in all of that was the way you laughed at certain points of ridiculousness. And it just allowed me to see it a little bit differently. Everything felt so serious, and having somebody just point out the ridiculous nature of it and actually have that authentic reaction. And you weren't therapizing me, but I could see how you would show up as a counselor. And I think that it's incredibly useful to just be able to break through with humor.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
I want to read a couple of comments.
Go
Go
ahead,
ahead. Go ahead. You go ahead, Michael. Go, and I'll find a few while you're talking.
Sure.
I'll read them before we close out.
Christine's probably heard me wrestle with this for a couple years. I know I'm always trying to find balance between my head and my heart. I love a long-winded, multisyllabic, totally complex, ridiculous explanation of things. I love it. I think it's fun. It's fun to chew that apart, break it down, and see how it's functional and applicable in life. I also love letting that go and going to a place that is just two people sitting there and just being two people. That's it. Plain and simple. Could you have a cup of coffee with this? And this kind of my metric, and just talk about life. Therapists on the art side don't give up the intellectual side altogether. That's exactly right. It informs things, right? But it doesn't necessarily control or navigate the frame of the relationship.
Yeah.
Now, you might need it if you have a certain type of presentation, and I tend to break psychology roughly into two categories as people see it. One is dealing with acuity and symptomatology. One is dealing with what has become more of a talk therapy space, less directive, more existential, philosophically inclined, client-centered. I think we're always kind of fighting amongst those two tribes and the multiple tribes within them. But can you just sit there with someone? And can you just be okay with sitting there with somebody? Have you ever sat with a client who doesn't talk week after week? I had that experience in the last 2 years. It was unnerving. It was interesting. I had to read Roger's what is it, The Silent Young Man, and just kind of like, ground myself before sessions. This isn't something that, you're going to hear people, and we've heard them over the years, that you're going to break it into the big five personality. You're going to try and look at authoritarian skills. You're going to try and look at moral foundations theory. You're going to try and understand stereotype accuracy. You're going to try and understand implicit bias. All of these concepts are useful, but not when you're just dealing with a person as a therapist, as a guide, as a confidant. Those ideas, they have to be left at the door to some degree. Unless there's a pertinent reason for them to exist there, they really just have to be kind of in your toolbox as possibilities. But I think this whole movement has been a movement of seeing the world as nails, very reductive, as you described before, Leslie. It's just not sustainable. And in a world where mental health does not seem to be getting much better on a mass scale, we really need to start churning out clinicians who know how to be available and with people and understand how to navigate the systems that are making things challenging for them, and understand some of the contextual nuance of what makes someone's experience difficult, but not jumping in with assumptions in advance. That's really, I think, been at the heart of it. And that's been, for me, the most disturbing part is not being able to say, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of wonder also, I don't know if we have time to really get into this, but I wonder what your thoughts are on this. I think with the pressure to know and the pressure to be certain about so many things, it would be better to adopt a stance of humility, and I don't know about a lot of things, but it is also okay not to know and not to need to know. And I think that that's one of the, like, people who want to have a response to some of the authoritarian pressures around privilege, marginalization. They don't know how to respond because often they will not know how to respond because they don't feel like they have a smart answer that refutes it properly. It's okay sometimes just to not care, not want to. trust the science. I saw a couple people, Ray was mentioning that, trust the science, and Anthony Fauci, I am the science. And this need to have like a dissertation on why you don't want to participate in a lockdown or in getting a vaccine. You don't need to. It's okay just to say, I don't want that. I don't believe that. I don't. And that's okay. I think that one of the things you hear a lot is people don't have time to do all their own research. The quote, do all your research. And you don't have to. It's okay just to make a decision for yourself and not necessarily know. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. And I want to read a couple of comments first and see if you have a response. So is it Uder Pelab? Thank you. I don't know how to pronounce your name, your username. It says, hi, Leslie from Italy. We love you. Thank you so much. That's so nice.
Aww.
Yeah. And then, Jen says, FYI, my husband is overhearing this and just said, right. This is about clients repeating cultural stories as if they are their own stories when Michael was talking about that. Firewall on one's identity is an intriguing concept from Morning Cigar. There are, Jen liked the process versus content question. David LeBoy says, precisely, Michael, I always say I'm okay with I don't know as an answer. So much good dialogue here. Yeah, David Lowboy. Is there a God? What happens after we die? Did the Big Bang happen without a creator? I don't know. That's right.
I was not given a manual. Not one
Yeah.
that I could rely on anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. As I think wonder and curiosity is increasingly seen as weakness from very Veros. Yeah. I think
Well
that sounds-
said.
Yeah, Morning Cigar. Thank you so much for the super chat. Says such a peaceful, deep, and insightful podcast. Thank you, Michael, and each of you always. If my life ever made it into the mental health field, this would be the place to be renewed.
Oh, that's
really lovely.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Gosh, so much, so many good comments in here and good conversations happening. Thank you all so much for participating in this. So yeah, any thoughts on not needing to know?
I don't know. No.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At risk of ruining that moment, let me say this. It has been one of the hardest, one of the most challenging stuck points for me as a professional, as a person. It's very hard to be, or it at times can feel very challenging. Right now I'm with a very open group of people. It can be challenging to kind of speak forth what I think is my sensibility on my best days, like this. And I remember a mentor when I was younger who was asking me questions, kind of played this game of Socratic questioning. I was quite young. I hope you don't mind me sharing a little personal story, but we were going back and forth, and I kept trying to answer the question from a really young age. It was like a Sunday dinner kind of conversation. And eventually, they stopped me and they said, "But Michael, it's okay to say you don't know." It was one of those formative moments because I too wanted to know. I wanted the certainty. I wanted the reward points, the pat on the head. You want in school, we want that growing up. We want to get the right answer on the test. We want to know how to resolve someone's suffering, ideally. Sometimes we don't know. And sometimes not knowing actually is treatment. That's a whole other conversation.
Nichama Gluck says it is critical to be able to say no to the world without needing to provide justification. No. Why is not anyone else's business? Yeah.
I love that. Thank you
I
for
do
that
too.
reminder. I need that reminder now and then that you can just say no. You don't have to then justify it and have the person agree with your no. It can just be no.
That's right.
That's lovely.
Don't have to explain yourself. Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful note to leave it on. And Michael, before we switch over to the members only chat, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you and your work online?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me over Critical Therapy Antidote with Christine. Reach out. We're on Instagram, YouTube. You can find our videos, our podcasts, our conversations. Thank you so much for having me for this conversation and for allowing it to be kind of open frame and to talk about kind of the art and sensibility of the field, because I think my greater point about values before was that if you want to head in the direction of something you value, you got to define it, you got to get it clear. And there's a feeling to that, but there's also some things we can articulate that might help guide people along the way. So I hope people out there, clinicians out there, perhaps even the ones who are feeling burned out by the last decade or so, can reconnect with and remember why they do this work in the first place. It's a calling. It's not just a job.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Michael. And I really mean it about the open invitation. I love having you on and hearing your thoughts. And it's just been a pleasure to have you today. And I think there's so much still to explore on this topic.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for joining us in the chat. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And we're going to